Let me see you just bounce it with me, just bounce with me, just bounce it with me, come on.
My entire being is on fire. My bean. No, that sounds gross. All right.
Like when I called you my little bean, and then I was like, I gotta stop saying that. Alrighty, everyone. Welcome back. And welcome to the family officially. Courtney, Jenna, Phil, Riley, Sarah, and Yesenia. We hope you are enjoying our backlog of Patreon episodes.
Oh, by the way, hi.
Oh!
You're listening to Creep It Real. Thanks for listening to Creep It Real.
That's Ashley. This is Bianca.
Hello.
If you would like to support us in another way, sharing us with your other creepy friends and family, and a 5-star written review on iTunes does go a long way. So does subscribing to us on Spotify, Stitcher, wherever. So feel free to do that because it means more to us than you know. In popular culture and UFO conspiracy theories, men in black, or MIB, are supposed men and women, we found out, dressed in black suits who claim to be quasi-government agents who harass, threaten, or assassinate UFO witnesses to keep them quiet about what they have seen. It is sometimes implied that they may be aliens themselves and seem to be linked to another entity we've talked about, black-eyed kids. In David Weatherly's book, Black-Eyed Children, he described these entities as being picked up by mysterious men in black in a large car after being thrown out by a couple who had previously allowed the black-eyed kids inside.
Bad decision.
Not good. Not good decision-making skills. The term men in black is also frequently used to describe mysterious men working for unknown organizations, as well as various branches of government allegedly designed to protect secrets or perform other strange activities. The term is generic, used for any unusual, threatening, or strangely behaved individual whose appearance on the scene can be linked in some fashion with a UFO sighting. Several alleged encounters with the men in black have been reported by UFO researchers and enthusiasts.
Which might seem...
To say the least.
At this point, no one knows who these men really are or where they're from. After the first encounters, it was thought that they were simply government agents, just as they sometimes claim to be, from the CIA, FBI, or even a secret branch of the Air Force. But as time passed and more people encountered these weirdos and their behavior, mannerisms, and appearances began to grow increasingly more bizarre, it became clear that who these guys were was not as simple as that.
They typically talk to two types of people, those who have witnessed a UFO and those who research UFOs.
Oh dear.
It is said that when they introduce themselves, they produce a white card with a security logo on it and refer to each other as numbers. The book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, which we'll talk about in depth, was the first to describe the men in black as a group of mysterious figures who, according to UFO conspiracy theorists, intimidate individuals into keeping silent about UFOs.
No one's intimidating me. I'll tell you that right now. The men often appear and disappear suddenly. They typically arrive in groups of 3, completely unannounced people who have been involved in some way or other with a UFO. Now, that doesn't mean they're always coming in 3s, but...
There's sometimes they come in a couple.
Or on their own, or on their creepy little own. The minute the unsuspecting person answers their door, the men forcefully barge their way in. So that's a little different than the black-eyed kids in that they have to get invited.
Maybe black-eyed kids are men in black in training.
Maybe there's little men in black. Maybe they're all little. Yeah, maybe so. They're the men in black's children.
They're the children in black.
Children in black.
That's why they have black eyes.
Oh my God, we solved it all.
We got it. Everybody, go home.
Cross that off the list, everybody. No need to talk about it any longer. I'm sure you're all satisfied with those answers. So the minute the unsuspecting person answers their door, they forcefully barge their way in. They shout incoherently, and in this way, Will and Tommy Lee had it right, and that's one of the only ways. Because I'll tell you right now, we're going to reference that movie like...
Are you talking about the documentary Men in Black?
Yes. A very accurate documentary starring Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. And the video for the theme song or the what theme song is that? What you would call it? Oh, it brings you back to 1997 so hard. Oh God! Then I also kind of forgot what a babe that I used to think Will Smith was.
Really?
Because now he's just Will Smith, who was for a while a open Scientologist.
He was?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
But he's so beloved that no one gives a shit.
I had no idea. Honestly, Tom Hanks could be a Scientologist, and I'd be like, you know what? Love Tom Hanks.
Well, he's since distanced himself from it, but I mean, it's probably only publicly. But yeah, I was shocked.
Wow.
But, yeah,
that's really surprising.
Anyway, yeah, he used to do it for me big time in 6th grade.
Sixth grade.
I made a song up one time about how hot he was on Independence Day, and I would go around the schoolyard singing it. I don't remember the words. Okay, so anyway.
But it was there.
Oh, I need to calm down. Okay, so what seems obvious with each reported encounter is that these men seem to have a goal of creating as much discord and disruption as they possibly can from the outset. What their ultimate goal is, we're not entirely sure, but they definitely seem intent on frightening the people they visit. After the initial chaos has sufficiently disturbed the person or people, the men in black then shift their objective and mention UFOs and aliens. Somehow, it seems as if these men are made aware when a person has photographed a UFO and are able to tell them details of their photo that the person often has not even noticed yet themselves,
Why do you know? Yeah, why do you know what I
How do you know anything about this? After they've established their agenda, they cap off their visit with everyone's favorite, a nice old threat, saying that if the person doesn't stop poking around and talking about UFOs, they are going to regret it.
You're going to regret it.
You're going to regret it. Occasionally, with these threats, the men in black will try to persuade the person that it is for the good of their old beloved US of A. In a few cases, it's for the good of the entire world. And even fewer, they claim to keep their mouth shuts would be for the good of the entire universe. Oof. Which is a lofty, it's not lofty, but a heavy weight to put on someone's shoulder.
It's a heavy burden.
Do not tell a soul about that little thing you saw flying in the sky, or else the entire universe is going to explode.
Oh my God.
I don't think it's probably that bad. Their appearance at the outset seems normal, but upon closer examination and extended exposure to them, it is clear that they look disconcertingly inhuman. It has been reported in almost all Men in Black encounters that their skin looks like plastic or rubber, and they are completely hairless, have no hair on their head, eyebrows, face, nothing.
In the works of John A. Keel, again we'll go into him, they sometimes have an olive green complexion, and this is sometimes attributed to the possibility that Men in Black are actually mechanical or alien in nature rather than human. In addition, they are described as expressionless and sinister looking, with unnaturally red lips as though they paint them on.
Well, they probably...
They need a different shade, girl.
You look beautiful tonight, Men in Black. They look like suit-clad mannequins, essentially, and their overall behavior isn't much more dynamic than that. It is often reported that their mannerisms are even very robotic as well, which sounds really like I don't want them coming in my house late at night.
It sounds like they're trying to learn how we act, but then, like, wouldn't you think after so many years, like, there would be a system in place for these?
You would think. But also
through training or something.
We're going to I'm going to break the seal. Okay. So I guess we already broke it. We broke the seal long ago when we already talked about the black-eyed kids. You look like you're human, but you're not quite a human thing is also a theme that has been run through many a paranormal story that we've talked about.
Skinwalkers.
Yeah, skinwalkers, black-eyed kids. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's more, but those were the main ones that stick in my head right now. Of course. Skinwalkers are going to be on the tip of my brain for the rest of my life. The Men in Black are often awkward and clumsy as they move around performing basic human functions and additionally misuse common words while displaying off-putting body language, which I can imagine. In many encounters, common everyday items seem to completely befuddle them, such as pens, utensils, and Jell-O. Listen, Jell-O befuddles me as well.
I actually have a story about that at the end, which I'm really excited to tell you.
Well, maybe I shouldn't say anything about Jell-O now.
No, it's not.
Okay, it's not Jell-O. Okay, I was like, because I don't understand why Jell-O's a thing either. Strange electrical phenomena.
Synchronicity.
Well, I mean,
with everything.
Yes. Interference and occurrences are associated. So electrical interference and occurrences are also associated with the Men in Black, much like many other paranormal phenomena that we talk about and everyone knows about. I want to start a cult about this. Wait a second, I already did. And you should go to Patreon if you want to check it out.
Good plug.
Once they leave, the people are typically bewildered as to why they let them in the first place, which I would agree with you 100%, but I feel like that's happened too, maybe. And they feel as if they are under some kind of trance, which definitely happened with Black Eyed Kids. Mm-hmm. Maybe because the Black Eyed Kids are just the children of Men in Black. Now that we know.
They're in training.
Yeah.
Duh.
So now let's take y'all back to some history.
As the dust settled from World War II and the United States launched into a Cold War with Russia, paranoia and conspiracies spread throughout the country.
Much like today.
In this climate of high-tension suspicion arose the first mass sightings of unidentified flying objects, UFOs, in American history.
What? That's what that means?
Fuck you. See our episodes on Project Blue Book. Speaking of, most of what is speculated comes from a report by Kenneth Arnold. Again, Project Blue Book. Mm-hmm. He was an aviator who had claimed to see several UFOs in the area around that time, in the first UFO sightings ever recorded in the modern era. The story Ashley is about to tell you differs depending on which source you read, but the main points do remain the same.
So, the first known Men in Black encounter was with a fisherman named Harold A. Dahl, who had what he felt was a fairly traumatic experience. Harold was on his fishing boat with his son and their dog when he noticed 6 very odd-looking crafts flying overhead. As they stood looking up at these things, one of them dumped a substance they later described as molten lava onto the boat. Tragically, this substance landed directly on their dog, killing it instantly.
Always the dogs.
Yep. And the old aliens have lost me for good with that one. But also, I want to know, what is this vendetta that aliens or UFOs or its fines or flying craft or orbs, whatever, seem to have against dogs? Because if you recall, back in Skinwalker Ranch, as I speak about all the time, our friend rancher Terry Sherman had multiple dogs that were murked by UFOs or flying orbs or whatever the heck it was out there, where they literally just zapped them into the ground in like a puddle of goo. Harold and his son suffered severe burns themselves and had to be hospitalized, but not before Harold was slick with it and collected a sample of the substance that had taken the life of his poor pup. Mere days after this experience, Harold received the ominous knock on his door and was greeted by a man clad head to toe in black standing before him. While Harold said that the man seemed incredibly out of place, he simultaneously projected a truly terrifying authority, which is kind of similar to the Black Eyed Kids. Mm-hmm. He demanded that Harold forget everything he witnessed and not press the issue with the substance with anyone any further. After the man visited multiple times, Harold Dahl said whoever he was, he had thoroughly convinced him to forget about what had happened in any kind of official capacity.
So Kenneth Arnold was the person that was being told this story, and he was convinced by the story, and he contacted an Air Force intelligence officer who flew in along with another from California, and Dahl's story definitely got the attention of various law enforcement agencies in the U.S., leading the FBI to write a report on the matter. The officers that Arnold contacted concluded the metal objects were aluminum and not of any kind of interest. They didn't reveal this to Arnold, however, to avoid embarrassing him. But this is weird because the officers then died in a crash on their way back to California.
Interesting.
So when I was reading this, I was like, wait, how does anyone know that if the officers died? Was their report sent elsewhere prior? Or is that even really the case? Also, how coincidental is it that they died on their way back? Are they coincidences? Yeah. Does anyone else feel like Charlie Day right now?
Did you seriously make that reference too? Because I said that somewhere too.
I 100% did. Now, not long after the encounter with the man in black, Dahl claimed that the whole thing was a hoax, but recanted years later, having allegedly made the first confession under duress. Since then, there have been countless reports where people who've claimed to have witnessed aliens say that they were subsequently visited by men in black suits who warned them to keep quiet about their experience. Writer John Sherwood claims that his friend Gray Barker, who we'll get into in just a moment, we'll just get into it in a moment, concocted the myth of the men in black in his 1956 book that we just talked about, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. Sherwood swears that Gray came up with the theory as a joke, similar to how rumors of how L. Ron Hubbard invented Scientology as a part of a bet with another science fiction writer as to whether he'd be able to invent a successful religion. Whether or not Sherwood's story is true, it still doesn't account for the fact that Howard Dahl's report of a man in black sighting predates Barker's alleged hoax by almost a decade. Now, in order to delve more into Great Barker, we must first discuss Albert Bender.
One of the first and most well-documented Men in Black encounters was that of 30-year-old office clerk Albert Bender, which, I mean, is a pretty rad name.
That's a good name.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. After a short stint in the military during World War II, Albert, still trying to find his way in life, which right there with you, buddy, moved into his parents' attic.
I mean, at 30, are you supposed to know?
I mean, I think some people feel as though, yes, and some people do. It's just everybody's on a different path.
It's true. So Bender was from Bridgeport, Connecticut, and had a fascination with strange and unearthly phenomena that actually predated the Kenneth Arnold affair by a year and a half, which ultimately spiraled into a full-blown obsession. The event that spiraled him was that which would make the Bermuda Triangle almost legendary. The disappearance of Flight 19, followed by the disappearance of a Mariner flying boat that went in search of the Flight 19.
What the fuck is a flying boat?
I think a flying boat is just like a rescue boat that's like looking for the pieces of the aircraft.
Okay.
I should look that up.
It's okay. We don't. I know that somebody out there is going to love to tell us.
Mm-hmm. They're going to love doing that. By the time of Kenneth Arnold's sighting in 1947, Bender was living with his stepfather on the top floor of an old 3-story house, and his fascination with flying saucers began to grow. And as his fascination with flying saucers began to grow, he would spend more and more time locked inside the upper room, which was an offshoot of the attic, just like Ashley said. He was reading paranormal books, journals, and newspaper clippings.
Well, calm it down there, bud. Just get a little more social interaction.
Just a little.
Outside world.
Wait.
Don't self-quarantine before it's needed.
Although he was, quite frankly, obsessed with UFOs, they weren't the only strange, for the time, of course, subjects he was into. He steeped his life in the literary gothic horrors of Bram Stoker, Mary Shelley, and Edgar Allan Poe, that sad boy. And he also had a tremendous fascination with the occult and things like seances, black magic, Ouija boards, and witchcraft. Nothing like us.
Listen.
But all right.
Hey.
Clearly living a solitary existence in a dark attic, unsurprisingly, began to change his life, and not particularly in a positive way. And as one does, one day out of the blue, he took it upon himself to paint the walls of the attic as grotesque, nightmarish creatures in a task that would take him no less than 8 months.
That little tidbit was left out of my research, and that really makes me feel a little bit... I'm feeling a different
vibe about him.
Okay, so just as a side note, I watched this horror movie on Shudder called the other day, and it's about a being, some sort of entity that haunts a family or something. Anyway, the child supposedly has drawn this enormous wall-sized picture of this creature on his wall, and so that is exactly what Albert Bender did.
Yeah,
and if you have those things on your wall like that, it sure seems like it's going to be easy to get you in the mind space to be like, what the fuck is on my wall right now when you're laying there in the dark? Absolutely.
If those are the things that are keeping your mind obsessed with something, that's what you're going to probably constantly look for.
Okay.
He began to refer to his living space as Bender's Chamber of Horrors. Super edgy boy.
He needs a fedora soon.
His life was blighted by psychological issues as well, and he displayed symptoms of OCD and became a hypochondriac, developing an illogical dread of developing some form of cancer. Side note, maybe that wasn't so illogical, though. We all know that those who are close to UFO encounters, black-eyed kids, etc., somehow develop some serious radiation poisoning. So here's what's weird. Ashley, you and I, that's my name, always talk about how everything is connected to the point where I'm starting to feel like I'm an absolute Eileen Warnos.
You've been a crazy nutbag for years. All right.
But it should also be noted that an increased amount of strangeness had significantly afflicted the Bender family for years prior to Albert's own experiences. A cousin of his had, as a child, experienced a bedroom visitation from a woman in black. Another relative died of a brain hemorrhage that some members of his family claimed was due to the actions of a supernatural entity.
Well, that's a very It's a very scientific conclusion you've drawn.
Scientific
everyone.
entity.
Well, but I guess I need to know the details before I judge the family.
That's fair.
We don't know.
That's fair.
But from struggle comes stupendous triumph, and it was in that very attic.
His parents.
His stepdads. That Albert founded the first major civilian UFO investigation group, the
MUFON. Just
International Flying Saucer Bureau, IFSB.
He began to more seriously cross-reference many reports and stories that came his way, and he hooked up with like-minded devotees of the space people, and he embarked upon the first steps of a very ambitious project, which was to establish a network of UFO investigators worldwide.
Listen, we're all the same, okay? I can't really be too. We're all the same here somehow through time. This ultimately came to fruition in April of 1952 and led Bender to publish his own magazine, Space Review. He brought the group to the forefront in the search for answers on UFOs when he began publishing this periodical. His obsession with UFOs struck a chord with others across the world, and soon they were writing him with their own encounters. After a few months, reigning as the unexpected prince of the UFO world, Albert was home alone one evening when the phone rang. Although it was initially like any other phone call, Albert said that the minute he picked up the receiver, he felt a cold chill run up and down his spine. "Hello?" he asked, and was met with silence. "Hello? Hello?"
It
Silence.
sounds like we're testing the mics right now.
But Albert said even though there was absolute silence coming from the line, he had the distinct feeling that there was definitely something listening to him on the other end. After a minute or so of eerie silence, he slammed the phone down. Feeling incredibly dizzy, he said he immediately went upstairs and got into bed, falling into an instant fitful and restless sleep. A few days later, he decided to go to see a sci-fi movie.
Little nerd.
And something that had always worked in clearing his "me too, little buddy." And that night, it ended up being a slight bust. The movie could barely hold his attention, and he found himself restless still, even in this delightful sci-fi movie, from this weird phone call that he's received. When it let out just after midnight, he began to walk home through the sleepy streets. Although it was late, and he should have probably been more worried about actual human trouble, he had the distinct feeling that he was being followed by something hiding in the shadows. He quickened his pace, but I do kind of feel him on that one. I think we've all been there at some point where we've been like, something's following me, I don't know. So he made it to the home he shared with his stepfather, opening the door, slamming it shut, and locking it behind him as fast as his little hands would do it. He made his way up to his room in the attic, and immediately upon opening the door, his nose was assaulted by the absolutely horrible smell of burning sulfur, and before he knew it, he was in a face-off with a shining, glowing ball of light in the middle of his room. He quickly flipped the switch, and the orb disappeared immediately, as if it never existed in the first place. He obviously had to question his sanity, judgment, and vision for a second, maybe, if he was critical in any way of his thinking, but we'll see. It's up to you to decide. Was he delirious? Did he even actually see that thing in the room? And of course you did, Albie, but those little aliens are just tricky little bitches. So he scanned the room. He realized, no, he wasn't just sleep deprived in UFO craze. The orb had left a complete and utter mess everywhere. All the files he had compiled through his research were scattered everywhere, all over his room, as if someone had literally torn it apart looking for us frantically.
Yuck.
Yeah.
He wanted to put this situation in the past, and he tried to do normal activities. IFSB, he liked to terrify his friends at 30 years old, and he liked hanging up at the cinema. Honestly, I forgot he was like 30. This makes me view him as like a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old or something.
I mean, he does seem like an angsty teen, but at the same time, there are things about him that I can relate to. As a 35-year-old who
That's
is
true,
like,
that's
you know,
true.
what is age? Everyone, come on. But Albie knew his calling, and he wasn't going to let any threatening entity stop him on his mission. Pay heed, my FBI agent. You're not going to stop me, all right? And he continued on his path, organizing events and meetings for his dedicated IFSB followers. He also decided to catch a new sci-fi flick at the theater, because apparently that's all he ever went and did. But
like
we know
sci-fi.
someone who's very particular in his taste, and I don't think Cody has seen a movie that's outside of the horror genre in
Quite a
15
while.
years. So one evening in November of 1952, we went to see this movie where he had another strange encounter, except this time it was inside the theater. As he sat watching the movie, he had the unmistakable feeling like someone was staring at him, which I will say in many different paranormal phenomena, that is something that people say. There is an unmistakable feeling. Like you cannot deny when you know someone is just has their eyes just pouring through your skull. He looked all around him and he could see no one in particular that was even his way. Then, as he was glancing around and attempting to find the person who may be staring at him, a man dressed all in black appeared out of nowhere in the seat next to him. He said it was as if the seat were empty 1 second and then the next, the weird man was suddenly there, like he just popped into existence. He wore a long black trench coat, a fedora. He was probably just trying to say, look, dude, this is how you should be dressing with your attitude and interests. Get that fedora on your head, my
Be
lady.
more edgy, milady.
Yeah. And Albert said that this man's eyes glowed unnaturally in the dim light of the movie theater, which does not sound very appealing to me. I think movie theaters are a little creepy, especially if there's not a lot of people in them. But obviously, that's foregone.
Conclusion.
You're like, you and one other person are the only ones in the movie theater.
Yeah,
Is that a delight or not?
No.
That's terrible. Okay, so just as he had on his prior walk home from the movie theater that one time when he was like, something's following me in the shadows, but he never really saw anything. And after that phone call that he had gotten, he said that he felt extremely sick, like he was going to throw up. He said the room began to spin and then he closed his eyes. And when he reopened them, the man was gone. Then he tried to rationalize, telling himself that in the 10 seconds his eyes were closed, the creep had swiftly gotten up to go get popcorn, or maybe it was an optical illusion to begin with, that he was even sitting next to him, which you're really trying to convince yourself of some
optical
shit
illusion.
right there. He attempted to try to get back into the movie, but understandably that proved to be a nearly impossible task. Then suddenly, he felt that same feeling of being spied on, to the point that he felt compelled to turn around, and when he did, he was horrified to find that the man was sitting directly behind him, staring at him with a look of utter contempt and anger. If this is true, then good Lord.
Yuck.
Unable to handle the unsettling situation any longer, Albert got up, wanting to get back to the quote-unquote safety of his home. He was plagued by similar and rather ambiguous Men in Black related events for the next few months until they finally decided to pay him a face-to-face visit. That said, Albert was not attempting to avoid this seemingly inevitable formal introduction, as he had planned what he called Contact Day with his IFSB crew. Albert was a forward-thinking chap, and even back in the 50s thought that the connection between extraterrestrials and humans might just be a concerted effort of collective telepathy, which, even as crazy it may sound, kind of impresses me because, as we discussed in an episode that I can't remember, I think it was Black Eyed Kids. I think.
And, no, Shadow People, Incubus,
I don't know what it was.
It's
terrible.
all of the paranormals.
Yes.
All of the paranormals.
But there was a specific case where a large group of people conducted this groupthink experiment where they were concerted effortly thinking about positive changes, and like the crime rate in the city went down
I think that
enormously.
I gotta say, I think that was Black Eyed Kids.
I do too, but I'm just not positive. I mean, so there is some evidence that suggests that this concerted effort does have the ability to do some things in the world, because brains are powerful things that I don't think we even really realize how powerful they are. While some may find it wishful thinking, which I guess it was to a degree, Albert thought that if he and all his IFSB cohorts set aside a specific hour in which they could essentially meditate, repeating mantras demanding that the extraterrestrials contact them, the ETs would respond. 2 of his board members thought the idea was ludicrous and adamantly rejected it as nonsense, but they were overruled and they went on with the experiment. Which, I mean, obviously they should. And
I mean, you should just
Right.
just do the experiment. An experiment doesn't mean anything other than you're experimenting.
You're not like signing your life away
Yeah.
to the belief of
Just try.
whatever. Yeah, that's so stupid. But okay, that's how I feel about everything. That's how I feel. If any of you out there are like, Men in Black don't exist because that's just stupid. You know, there's no proof of this. It's just the same thing with ghosts. It's like, well, you're close-minded. And so maybe you should think about the fact that just because there's not any way to prove it doesn't mean that it's, at this point in time with science, does not mean that it's not necessarily possible that it's going to happen in the future, everyone. That's happened with things.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Let me help you right off of that soapbox.
I got worked up. Oh, man. I was like, this is such a different story. I was like, I started last episode crying. I started this episode just laughing, and now I'm on a soapbox again. But I guess it's a whole other type of soapbox.
You always go.
How dare you?
I'm just saying what everybody's thinking.
Oh, God. Well, listen, I mean, why did I make a podcast? So I could get on a soapbox. Listen, it's just true. Okay. So Albert publicized his experiment in Space Review, along with other IFSB publications, and hoped that millions of people would join in. Anyone who read the group's periodicals was invited to join and given specific instructions on how they should do so. He deemed it a, quote, special bulletin, and the instructions read, on March 15th, all officers, representatives, and members are asked to participate in an experiment, something that has not yet been attempted by any group such as ours.
Because you're the first one, but okay.
He just knows. All right. We will, like all those Mayans were
That's true.
doing the same thing. How the hell do you know, Albert?
That's
You
true.
fucking
That's true. I didn't even think
1950s
about that.
motherfucker. The world's been around for much longer, Albert. So he continues, we will attempt to send a message to the occupants of the saucers by the use of mental telepathy. Each member will memorize the message and, on the time designated, will close his or her, Albert, eyes in a quiet, secluded spot, lie down if possible, and repeat this message in his mind. Albert's mental message went a little something like this. Calling occupants of interplanetary craft that have been observing our planet Earth. We of IFSB wish to make contact with you. We are your friends and would like you to make an appearance here on Earth. Your presence before us will be welcomed with the utmost friendship. We will do all in our power to promote mutual understanding between your people and the people of Earth. Please come in peace and help us in our earthly problems. Come help us in our earthly problems. You're sitting there begging for help. That's gonna get them. Please, aliens, donate $30 to my fund.
This is an intergalactic GoFundMe.
Good Lord, Albert. Anyway,
Or Patreon. Go find us on www.
if you want to go on there. Okay, but let me continue on with the end of this message that he wanted all his followers to say. He wanted millions of people to be begging these aliens for help. Okay. Give us some sign that you have received our message. Be responsible for creating a miracle here on our planet to wake up the ignorant ones to reality. Let us hear from you. We are your friends.
Oh, he really wanted to contact him. But you got to give something to get something.
What a little beggar. Okay, so if this sounds familiar to anyone out there, apparently about 10 years after Contact Day, a band called Klaatu, I'm not really sure, Klaatu, I'm sure someone out there has listened to them, wrote a song using Albert's directive as their lyrics, and a year later, the Carpenters covered it with a 160-piece band, and their song got on the top 10 charts with this.
Really?
Yes. I was surprised to hear this whole thing, but yes, they milked that Albert Bender thing for all it was worth. They had a TV special where they got abducted by aliens or something. I couldn't tell you. The Carpenters, I have never listened to them. Is that your music?
Is that California Dreamin'?
California Dreamin'?
No, that's the one that's on the Papas. Sorry, just kidding.
Okay,
Tupac. California Love. California Love. Yeah.
Okay, we'll stop.
Wrong.
We'll stop.
Keep going. Lots of songs about California. It's fine.
Hotel California. Let's just name them all. We might as well. Okay. California. The Red Hot Chili Peppers have a song called
Californication.
Okay, we're gonna stop now. Oh my God. But anyway, at 6 p.m., March 15th, 1952, Albert dutifully began the Contact Day procedure. He dimmed the lights in his room, laid out on his back on the floor, closed his eyes, and began repeating his mantra. He said as soon as he had repeated the mantra 3 times, he felt the temperature in his room drop significantly, and chills began to, again, this is a theme with him, run up and down his spine. A terrible headache came upon him. He said it was as if someone were slamming a sledgehammer down on his head. Then the awful odor of sulfur, like rotten eggs, filled the room. If this is true, we just have to make a side note here, everyone. How many times do we hear about
sulfur?
That sulfur smell, rotten egg smell, dead body-ish smell in paranormal encounters? Albert then said that shortly after these fairly unpleasant situations began, he passed out, feeling as though everything around him was just fading out of existence. Next thing he knew, he was surrounded by blue flashing lights, and his migraine got even worse, focusing just above his eyes. Then suddenly, the headache had magically disappeared, and Albert found that he was floating directly above his body in what he described as an out-of-body experience. He stared down in bewilderment at his body laying below him. He said that he began to hear an authoritative voice in the distance. It said, "We have been watching you and your activities. Please be advised to discontinue delving into the mysteries of the universe. We will make an appearance if you disobey."
Wait, isn't that what he wanted, though?
I was like, really with that? Like, are you trying to encourage him to continue this? If you disobey, we're going to come. You're sitting here going, please visit me. Please visit me. It doesn't make any sense. But the harsh reprimand was not what he had been looking for and hoping for in an attempt to contact extraterrestrials. Though it's definitely odd, like we just said, that they're threatening him with something that is not a threat. Understandably confused, he sent back a mental response. Why aren't you friendly to us, as we do not mean to do any harm to you? The voice, dripping with distaste, replied, we have a special assignment, and we must not be disturbed by your people.
Oh.
So we're to deduce that they were conducting a double-blind study on Earth, and all those pesky ufologists were just messing their shit up? I find that to be a little bit interesting. Then the entity left Albert with one ominous parting remark. We are among you and know your every move, so please be advised, we are here on your Earth. And with that, it was as if a spell had been broken, and Albert woke up, reunited with his body once again, and for a split second, he could have sworn the shadowy figure of the man in black stood watching him. But a moment later, the figure was gone, and he was all alone in his room once again. Obviously, this left Albert wondering yet again if he really had this experience. Was he dreaming? While it was obviously possible, the entire experience left him feeling, to be blunt, rather fucked up.
Yeah, and, oh, how sad.
A little bit mean.
It's like mean.
the one, well, no, I was going to say, like, the one people who would accept him in life, but no, all the ufologists have accepted them.
Never meet your heroes.
But your heroes are always going to disappoint you.
Never
You're going
meet
to be
your heroes.
like my sweet little fucking 9-year-old self who wrote Dean Cain a love letter for the ages, and then 7 months later, I get a postcard sent back to me with a stamp on it. Best wishes, Dean Cain. Not even my name. Nothing.
No.
Fuck that guy. I've hated him ever since, and he's beneath me at this point. But I mean, all he does is Hallmark movies. I'm so much.
You're so much better than that.
Oh, jeez, I hate him. I hate his guts. I have hated him ever since. Okay, I'm gonna get. Oh. I hate Dean Cain. So, Albert said that his life became a waking nightmare as he was plagued with terrible nausea to the point that he couldn't even eat. He became incredibly ill. He had trouble sleeping, and he was in an unexplainable state of overwhelming lethargy that he could not explain. It was as if he had some sort of vampire draining him of all his energy every moment of the day. Lori Vallow, leave him alone, you bitch. In addition to the physical aftermath, Albert was... she traveled back in time. Okay. In addition to the
with Barry Soetoro?
You know what? She didn't even have to travel back in time because she is able to drain the energy of people in every decade that's ever existed with her nonsense. In addition to the physical aftermath, Albert was left with a frustrating situation. He'd had this incredibly bizarre experience, supposedly, but didn't really know how he was supposed to explain it to anybody. He was already thought to be a bit of a cuckoo in a number of circles, and he felt that would happen exponentially if he tried to tell the story to anyone, which I can totally...
100%.
I've been telling stories all week at work that people are like, are you fucking...
Are you okay? Do you need a week off?
So instead, Albert decided to write the story down, lock it up in a safe with the rest of his valuables, and keep the story to himself until he figured out his next move. After some time, he decided he had two options. Write the government to warn them of what he'd learned, which is a pretty dumb idea, to be fair.
Always the worst.
Stupidest thing I've ever heard in my
Always
life.
the worst.
Are you kidding me?
Mm-mm.
Have you been in
that.
the game for like a day and a half? Because I don't understand anyone that would think, let me take a second and write
the government
about this alien that I've encountered perhaps while I was doing MDMA in my room. No, that wasn't invented in the 50s. He was just dropping smoking weed. I don't think weed would do that to you in the 50s, though.
Acid, though.
Acid, was that around in the 50s?
I think so. Well, no, that was more of a 60s
I think the acid wasn't acid created for MK Ultra, or was that just in my head then too? I covered MK Ultra.
No, I know.
Well, anyway.
No, but it wasn't created. I mean, maybe it was created for it. But anyways, moving forward.
His second option was to publish it in the Space Review, which is what he eventually decided he was going to do. But when he went to his safe to take out his painstakingly crafted account of his encounter, it was nowhere to be found, and he said the smell of sulfur seemed to inexplicably emanate from the safe itself. Then a week later, just after falling asleep one night, he had the same quote-unquote dream he'd had on contact day, where he was immediately ripped from his body and surrounded by a sea of flashing blue lights. Though this time, he was able to look around the room and see that 3 figures, dressed in black, emerged from the shadows of the attic. He thought they looked like clergymen, which would have been much more terrifying because those men would be about to put their penises in your orifices. But they were wearing fedoras, which we know definitely is not clergymen.
It's Reddit users.
It's Reddit users for sure. One of them began to speak to him, not aloud, but in his head, saying, "You have dedicated yourself to the strange problem of unidentified objects in your atmosphere. Your interest is deep and sincere, and you have devoted many hours to it. We also know that such interest and determination might lead to something that could bring you harm. We feel that you are a very good contact for us on your planet of Earth. You are an average person, and we know that what we tell you and show you will not be believed by anyone you might tell. You are not a person of great renown on your planet. Therefore, we have nothing to fear at present. We have a purpose for being here, and we will be here for some time yet. We must not be disturbed in our ultimate goal. As you see us here, we are not in our natural form. We have found it necessary to take on the look of your people while we are here." Oh my God. So the aliens talk to us like little kids do. You are ugly and not very smart. You know how kids are just totally brutal? Awful. That's all. You are a simple idiot. And we know
You're not important.
we know everyone will think you're a total fool if you say anything. I find it interesting that he thought legit that he could get 1 million people to do what he wanted, and they're telling him he's not important. Who has 1 million people that they can wrangle for tasks, and they're still not important? Even if he had,
A few thousand.
Come on.
Yeah.
Seriously, though, this is something that is repeated in many accounts of Men in Black encounters. They tell the person that even if they did tell the story of what they had witnessed, no one's going to believe them anyway because you're just some normal simpleton. Anyway, the voice then went on to admit that they could change shape at will, explaining, "This is mainly used as a means of returning here without being detected by anyone. We have made numerous contacts with Earth by means of craft from our own base, and at present we have craft hidden at a remote spot on your planet. We have found it necessary to go to great extremes at times to frighten off your Earth people, and it has resulted in their deaths. We have also found it necessary to carry off Earth people to use their bodies to disguise our own."
Ooh.
What is this, The Walking Dead? "We wish to keep in touch with you and tell you many things, because one day you will write about this, and we are certain that nobody will believe you, but you will be much wiser than anyone else on your planet. You will know what is out there in space, and you will know what the future holds for mankind. You will see all 3 of us again, but we shall not reveal our names, as they would mean nothing to you. Refer to us as numbers 1, 2, and 3. We will answer according to our number. We will leave you with a small piece of metal similar to your coins. It is to be kept in a secret place of your own. We wish to have you come with us at a time to be announced to you soon." Okay. It sounds a little bit like he was having a wet dream.
Okay. So real quick, I did want to say that the story that I read versus the story that you read regarding this is vastly, vastly different.
Okay.
like I'm not sure where you got the story because the thing that I read was that like at the height of his nausea and migraines and stuff, he was visited by somebody that was in black, and essentially they told him the mysteries of the universe, and they said, "But you can't say anything because we'll get you." And that was that.
Okay.
And I mean, the reason I say that is because it does bear mentioning that is considered the quote original story, that people just showed up. And then later there was like a 160-page report about how they told him that there was an underground base in Antarctica and yada, yada, yada. So
Okay.
your story and my story were very different.
Okay. Well, I do kind of feel like it was just that my story sounds very much like what he would sure hope an alien would say to him.
And that's why I wanted to tell you, because you like, this sounds like a wet dream he had, because it totally does.
So he says that he then awoke and was clutching a piece of metal in his hand. This time, he had to believe he experienced the encounter for real. Otherwise, how would that artifact have been in his hand to begin with? To all of his cohorts at the IFSB, it seemed that Albert was on the verge of something big, as he had been alluding to developments he was making in his UFO research and offering up little bits of teasy information to them for weeks. He wrote in Space Review saying, "The mystery of the flying saucer is no longer a mystery. The source is already known, but any information about this is being withheld by order from a higher source." Then, suddenly, he went completely silent about all of it, which sounds like you couldn't follow through. I don't know. Maybe.
In his own words, which were published in the final issue of the magazine, he said, quote, "We would like to print the full story in Space Review, but because of the nature of the information, we are sorry that we have been advised in the negative. We advise those engaged in saucer work to please be very cautious." So, maybe. That I would lend more credibility to than the little bits of teasies.
Yeah. So Gray Barker, journalist and writer and chief investigator for the IFSB, who was also a close associate of Albert Bender, said that he himself experienced the abrupt change in demeanor in 1953, saying that he went from being an evangelical UFO zealot to wanting absolutely nothing to do with UFOs seemingly overnight. Which that is slightly odd.
That's very strange.
Seems like you're scared or something.
Yeah. Gray is another prominent figure within the Men in Black phenomenon that we spoke about, that we're going to go ahead and delve into now. And he was one of the individuals who Albert Bender enthusiastically invited into the IFSB fold in 1953. In 1952, he had been working as a theater booker in Clarksburg, West Virginia, when he began collecting stories about the Flatwoods Monster, who was an alleged extraterrestrial that was reported by residents of nearby Braxton County. Barker submitted an article about the creature to Fate magazine and shortly afterward began writing regular pieces about UFOs for Space Review. He was born in Rifle, Braxton County, West Virginia, Mountain Mama, and graduated from Glenville State College in 1947. And according to UFO investigator Jim Mosley, who was a close friend of Barker's, he was drawn to Bender because they shared a similar childhood along with a fascination with horror movies, horror masks, and macabre material, just as Bender was.
Gray Barker was so disconcerted by Albert's sudden turnabout that he wrote a book that we already spoke about 7 times called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, about the final days of the IFSB. It was he who first proposed that there was a secret organization that was actively trying to quash any serious investigation into UFOs.
It dedicated a considerable amount of space to the Bender controversy, and within the book, Barker avoided explicitly stating that Bender's Men in Black were agents of the U.S. government or the FBI. However, that wouldn't be an impossible scenario, of course. Jerome Clark, who is very prominent within the UFO community, actually stated that it was actually very likely FBI agents did visit Bender. He suggested that during the Cold War, anybody and everybody that harbored nonconformist ideas with national security implications found themselves under good old J. Edgar Hoover's gaze. He went on to say, "In my opinion, agents may well have visited, and they may well have said something he took as threatening." From there, Bender's own imagination and Barker's freewheeling exploitation together generated the Bender mystery. Jerome Clark's opinion is pretty valid because that year that Bender was visited, which was 1953, it was the same year that the Robertson panel had been put together by the CIA. For a quick refresher, the Robertson panel recommended that a public education campaign should be undertaken in order to reduce public interest in the subject, minimizing the risk of swamping air defense systems with reports at critical times, and that civilian UFO groups should be monitored.
According to Gray, anytime someone got close to getting any sort of answers, they were visited by these mysterious men in black. He said that he'd come to the conclusion that the U.S. government knew much more than they were letting on about UFOs, which is something that we've learned a tiny bit about in recent years, and it is true, and posited that perhaps they even made some kind of deal with them damn aliens. He said the onus fell solely on then President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was still in his first term at the time, and as some of you may know, there are conspiracy theorists who believe that Eisenhower did in fact sign an official treaty with an extraterrestrial civilization at this exact time period, but those theories came long after Barker's open speculation.
Alan Greenfield, the famous occultist, also agrees with the sentiment that Jerome Clark had as well, although he mentioned that he had a meeting with Dewey Fournay in 1975, who was involved with the 1952 UFO flap, which began late on the night of July 19th, 1952, and included sightings of UFOs by the military, pilots of civilian aircraft, and even members of the public over Washington, D.C. and the White House. He, Fournay, became the liaison officer between the Pentagon in the Air Force investigation, Project Blue Book.
Oh,
I don't know if you've heard of it.
we haven't.
During this time, the government was terrified of the possibility of a Soviet attack, and this is what they believed was going on allegedly. Greenfield's thoughts on the matter were that a Soviet attack was much more mythic than UFOs themselves, but that UFO groups like the IFSB could be infiltrated by communist agents, so the FBI was going to the IFSB's door and just scaring the bejesus out of those UFO enthusiasts.
That's
Kinda
definitely a
sad.
possible theory.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, gotta say. Then, as if on clockwork, Barker claimed he was visited by one of these mysterious men in black in his office one evening. And he said that the man flashed a crisp, clean business card, one of his own, stating his title of chief investigator for the IFSB, and demanded to know what the card was all about.
Barker was clearly a nervous wreck and told him nervously that IFSB was just an innocent organization formed to investigate flying saucer phenomena, and the business cards were just a means by which investigators of the group could be identified. Honestly, if that's not the sweetest, nerdiest shit, I don't know what is.
Oh. After Barker explained to the man what that meant, the men in black told him the card had been found on a man who had just been admitted to the hospital. He said that the man had no ID on him, only Gray Barker's business card, and he was simply checking the lead to see if he could potentially find out who that man was in the hospital. When Barker told him that the man in the hospital was not someone that he knew, the men in black seemed to accept the answer easily and abruptly left. Afterwards, Barker thought on it a minute, and he realized that it would essentially be impossible for the unidentified man in the hospital to have one of his business cards, as he had them printed only a few days prior. And so he began to grow suspicious of the visitor and his excuse for why he had come to visit him. While the U.S. branch of the IFSB was then out of commission, the British and Australian branches had decided to continue pushing on. A man named Edgar Gerald, who was the director of the Australian division, would be the next target for them sneaky men in black. Shortly after Albert Bender had tendered his resignation, Edgar began to notice a black Cadillac parked outside his office on a routine basis. While this obviously could be nothing at all suspicious, he found it odd that he had never noticed it before, and now it was showing up on a near daily basis. Then he began to see two men, clad in black, fedoras and sunglasses, sitting inside of it. He said every time he looked out his window, the men were staring directly at him.
Yuck.
Every single time. Ugh. That is unsettling. Following these strange occurrences, he began to receive mysterious phone calls that he said he just knew were connected to the men sitting outside of his office. It was then that the poltergeist activity began. He said that it started with strange knocking sounds that came from all directions, originating from inside and outside his home, and then various household items began to disappear and reappear in places which he knew he had not placed them. Paranormal expert and UFO researcher who we have already talked about, John Keel, who wrote the Mothman prophecies and actually coined the term Men in Black, which we already talked about, called this realm that Edgar had moved into as, quote, high strangeness. We have before and will speak again of Mr. Keel because everything is connected, so keep your ears peeled, our creepy babies. The poltergeist activity remained innocuous enough for weeks until it grew physically violent as one afternoon in the middle of a popular department store, Edgar was pushed down a flight of stairs. For him, it was the last straw, and just like Albert, he tendered his resignation from the Australian chapter. And
Bullies.
Yeah, paranormal bullies. What the hell is going on around here? There is speculation that because Albert Bender and Edgar Gerald were quite close and spent many hours discussing their research over the phone, that it is very possible that Albert divulged more details of his encounters to Edgar than anyone else. If this is true, it stands to reason that they would silence Albert, the Men in Black, and then move along to the next link with the precious info and begin a terrorism campaign to silence him as well, if in fact any of this is true.
Actually happened.
Gray Barker would eventually grow skeptical of Albert Bender's Men in Black accounts and theories and decided that he believed they were actually just government agents, but the fact that Edgar had his experiences all the way over in Australia, along with the details of many other people's encounters, it definitely seems to support the theory that they do in fact have a supernatural element to them, as you will see as we go, at least in my opinion.
Because of the reports from witnesses that special agents were visiting them, the FBI's involvement with Men in Black encounters were not far behind. In an anonymous letter to Harold T. Wilkins, UFO investigator, it was revealed that in the latter part of January of 1953, the same year that Bender shut down his magazine and the year that Gray Barker was interrogated, two emaciated men, about 6'6", dressed in black with what are described as extreme features, we'll get into that in a moment, arrived at the company that this person worked for, which was an attorney's office. Despite nobody having any real inkling of who these people were, aside from the director of the company, who maintained quite tight-lipped about this situation.
Kind of like the Men in Black. Tight red lips.
Tight red lipstick lips. The informant described the bone structures of the hands of the men as, quote, free of joints, and that one of the men possessed remarkable strength, leaning over the top of a filing cabinet and leaving a half-inch indentation in the top of the cabinet.
How be free of joints?
It's weird. I don't like it. Someone within the company then called the feds, who sent out two agents to investigate, which caused the other two mysterious men to hightail it on out. The FBI confiscated the filing cabinet and turned it over to a chemist specializing in metallurgy, who determined that to produce the indentations present, it would have required the force of 2,000 pounds.
No, my 2,000-pound life floating around like that? I don't know.
They forwarded a classified report to their headquarters in Washington, D.C., and the report eventually vanished from all potential prying eyes. Interestingly, a few years later, a citizen of Oklahoma City contacted J. Edgar Hoover about the FBI's treatment of UFO investigators. Imagine if it was that easy to contact the head of the FBI.
Excuse me, you're being mean to me.
And Hoover responded that he was instructing a special agent of the Oklahoma City office to contact the writer. I'm sure the special agent that was sent down was in no way intimidating or frightening at all.
Nah.
And then in 1959, the FBI was interested in obtaining a copy of They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. And 3 weeks after the request, J. Edgar Hoover had it in his hands. The FBI noted that its files contained, quote, no information pertaining to the hush-up of Bender, which implies that this pretty specific denial of FBI involvement regarding silencing Albert Bender implies that whoever Bender's visitors were back in 1953 were not agents of the FBI.
Right.
Additionally, however, in the now declassified FBI papers, there isn't any mention of the interview with Gray Barker. Was the interview just off the record, or do they have reasons for not releasing its files? Or was he not interviewed by the FBI at all? What is going on?
You make it seem suspicious.
Do I?
FBI.
Oh, am I me?
No, my FBI. I'm talking to my FBI agent.
Oh.
You're suspicious.
Okay, fair.
All right?
As it seems has happened again and again as far as synchronicities are concerned, or maybe because of all the paranormal and conspiratorial subjects we research and study, but honestly, it's probably that. Brad Steiger, whose book we read regarding Project Blue Book and his small piece in Conspiracies and Secret Societies about Operation Paperclip, also has a hand to play regarding Men in Black.
Oh, God, even Operation Paperclip's involved in this, everyone. Our next encounter was experienced by one Cynthia Appleton, who was a British housewife who had zero prior interest in the paranormal, somehow.
Why wouldn't you?
I don't know. It's very weird. That's the weirdest part of this whole story, if you want me to be honest with you. On the afternoon of November 16th, 1957, Cynthia walked into her living room and was suddenly overwhelmed by a feeling of intense oppression. She then watched as her entire home was flooded with an intense illumination, and then she had an episode of what UFO researchers have long referred to as, quote, missing time. She looked at the clock, and suddenly it was an hour later, even though she had no explanation or idea what had taken place in that hour. She decided that the only explanation was that she had daydreamed for an hour and went about her day. I've never lost an hour.
I have never lost an entire hour. That would be amazing.
Unless I was taking a nap. I've never lost time like that. But I have read many stories of who have.
Of course.
Then 2 days later, at 3 p.m, she went upstairs to check on her child and looked out the window. The sky was such a rosy pink that she couldn't help but marvel at the color for a moment. But then, that oppressive feeling that she had 2 days prior returned. She felt a strange energy coursing through her that gave her goosebumps and caused her hair to stand on end. Then, she began to hear a high-pitched humming sound that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It quickly grew louder until she began to feel like it was vibrating through her entire body. She said the vibrations continued to increase so intensely that she thought her entire molecular structure was going to be ripped from her body. But then, just after she had that thought, the sound abruptly stopped. As she stood there attempting to calm her tits, she began to see a haze form before her. It swirled and pixelated until it began to look like a picture of an old staticky TV. Suddenly, as if someone found the sweet spot on a TV antenna, the haze became a crystal clear holographic projection of a man. She said that this projected man was mostly human-looking, around 6 foot tall, with pale skin, icy blue eyes, and very delicate features. He was wearing something she would describe as a spacesuit, and we now know what she described was extremely similar to the suits that NASA Apollo astronauts would wear several years after her encounter occurred, so at the time they did not exist. Cynthia said that initially she was terrified, and justifiably so, but the man repeated, "Do not be afraid," over and over in her head until it had somehow worked on her, and she was cool as a cucumber. She said it seemed that the being had the ability to calm her at will, and that is very reminiscent of the exact opposite of black-eyed children. He informed her that he had come from a planet called Garnasvarn and drew a holographic screen out of thin air, showing her images of his planet and spacecraft. This was an introduction of sorts, because soon after she was visited by this man, who was then accompanied by 2 additional men, and instead of arriving via haze and hologram, they arrived in none other than a, you guessed it, black Cadillac. It's kind of and maybe I'm just like a horny girl, but kind of there's like this little element of like, this is kind of like a sexy little encounter. Like, you're just coming and, you're like, look, this is where I'm from, Earth human who I've chosen as a special woman who I want to show these secrets to. I'm going to bring my boyfriends over and we're going to give you a treat. That's how I'm taking it right now. I think I might have a post-PMS horniness surging through me. So forgive me. Okay, so they rolled up, knocked on her door, and when she opened it, she was met with 3 men donned all in black, head topped in their trademark fedoras. "Milady," they said as she opened the door. These men continued to visit Cynthia in 1958 from February to August. They were getting it down.
Wow.
They were laying it down. Always knocking on her door as any full-fledged human would do. Despite this, Cynthia knew that these men were anything but normal because they had dicks that could move mountains. During one of their visits, one of the men in black mentioned that he had injured himself prior to their visit, showing her his finger that appeared to be badly burned. He asked her to bring him a bowl of hot water, which he dipped his finger in, and then spread a gel in a toothpaste-like tube onto his finger. According to Cynthia, the moment the substance touched the burn, it was healed. He then walked out of the door and hopped into the Cadillac, taking off down the street.
What? He was like, "Hello, I need hot water, goodbye."
That's like they've been dating for fucking 6 months, so you expect that kind of behavior from a man, even if it's a non-human man. When she went back inside, she saw that in the bowl of water that she had given him was a piece of dead skin that had come off during the rapid healing process.
Yuck.
Yuck, but also very interesting.
But very interesting, for sure.
Yes. After she came forward with her story, the sample of skin was sent off to a lab where it could be examined with the best.
She was able to keep the sample?
Yes, she kept it, and she sent it off so that it could be examined.
I would do. That's the smartest thing that any alien person in an alien story has ever done.
Mm-hmm. The skin was just, and that's what I'm saying, man. If it does not kiss and tell, because this bitch is obviously has gotten in good with these guys.
Yeah, no kidding.
They're leaving skin around, okay? They haven't taken pictures from her and never given,
that's true.
They haven't threatened her. They're like, please help me, and I'm going to leave back some stuff that you can take and get examined under a microscope. So the skin was determined not to be of human origin, but that hardly means it could be ID'd as alien either. Decades later, when scientists realized the similarities between human and pig DNA, some speculated that the skin the man in black left behind was this type of consistency because it was not naturally occurring, but had been grown in a lab, as it contained proteins that were incredibly similar to those that are used to grow tissue petri dishes.
Yuck. I don't like that.
The speculation originates from the theory that men in black are not naturally born beings, but are some kind of clones that were grown in a lab somewhere.
Okay.
Possibly. Or perhaps, after a life of disinterest in the paranormal, Cynthia got a wild hair up her ass and made the whole thing up, putting a piece of pork skin in a glass of water and claiming it was from an alien finger. I highly doubt it.
I doubt that.
I just think she wasn't even telling us all she knew. I need to know. Okay.
We should do a Bumblebutt style alien encounter
Sexy.
Patreon
I might get
episode.
Too worked up for this.
You might.
Okay. Okay. So that said,
I'll find one.
Okay. That said, aside from the black cars, clothes, and weird behavior, her accounts of her encounters with the men in black differ pretty significantly from the standard narrative, as we've already elaborated on. For one, typically, men in black only appear after a separate UFO event has occurred that they are attempting to convince the witness to essentially forget, while these guys seem to appear to Cynthia for the hell of it. Secondly, instead of attempting to, quote, make her forget, they encouraged her to tell others and even showed her images of their spacecraft and planet.
These don't sound like Men in Black.
They sound like sexy Men in Black. It's a different type. All right? It's a different type. So what were these Men in Black's objectives? Why would they appear to a person completely uninterested in the paranormal, encourage her to share the information they gave her, yet essentially reprimand someone who is incredibly interested in the UFO phenomenon? Are they just here to wreak havoc, cause chaos? A trickster of sorts, like we've talked about with multiple different things? It's possible. Also, you know, and now that I'm thinking about it, maybe people who are too interested are just getting too close to them and they don't like it. So they're like, hey, we want to get some change. And we're going to be interested in
the person who's not interested in it.
Yeah. So maybe, who knows?
The 1960s proved to be a decade in which the growth of Men in Black activity cannot be understated. And it was during this time that Steiger, that we just talked about, first began corresponding with John Keel. During his lifetime, he, John Keel, drafted into the U.S. Army and worked for the Armed Forces Radio Network and once broadcasted a show from the inside of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Following the completion of his enlistment with the military, he went on to the Middle East to hang out with fakirs, magicians, and occultists, later penning the book Jadoo, which means magic in, I believe it's Farsi or Hindi. And as we all do, when we delve into learning more about the paranormal and the esoteric, he became more and more caught up within the domain of the unknown. And he wrote the classics, at least to our kind.
You're right.
Operation Trojan Horse, The Mothman Prophecies, and The Cosmic Question. We'll get into, I keep doing this, but we'll get into him in just a second. So back to Brad.
We just sprinkle him in here and there. We're getting into him bit by bit.
I promise. Late one evening, while Steiger was working in his office, the telephone rang. According to Steiger, it was a well-recognized player regarding the UFO, scene.
Ooh.
The individual told him that he and his fiancée had a close sighting of a UFO, and when they returned home, violent poltergeist activity was literally tearing the place apart. There was screaming, there were thumps and crashes, and what sounded like furniture banging together.
Ugh.
What is the connection with poltergeist activity and UFO sightings? I don't know. It's all connected.
It's all connected. Every single last bit of it.
So the researcher said, quote, I tried to give it advice and calm it using metaphysical and mystical techniques, and things did seem to calm down. Right after he hung up the phone, Steiger said his office just became alive with something. There was a large crack that just appeared in the ceiling, and he told the entity, cut it the hell out. Then, on another night, pictures were flying off the wall, so he shouted, leave me alone, and everything stopped. Steiger's thoughts were probably that maybe one could command the poltergeist, or perhaps that it was a tactic to lure him into a deeper situation. Probably the latter.
According to Director Kyle, it is.
According to Director Kyle, it is. Men in Black reports began to inundate him. One of his friends told him he was visited a number of times by weird individuals who attempted to threaten him. Once he saw them in a car, got the license plate of the car they were driving, of which he did not recognize the brand or the model. He called the place into a friend he had in law enforcement and was told that there were no such license plate.
It was ALIENSF.
No.
I messed it up, man.
AL1
For you.
3. Oh, for you. Aliens for you.
Yeah.
Got it. There was another story from another friend of his who was a World War II vet and wanted to go to Vietnam to visit his son who was stationed there for the Vietnam War. 3 short Asian men were shadowing him everywhere he went, and at a train station, one approached him asking how to get to a particular city. First of all, Side note, why would which I'm assuming to be a white guy, be the person that you approach in Vietnam to ask for directions?
Probably not the best idea.
Well, he answered them that they were standing directly under the sign to go to where they were wanting to go, and they bowed and thanked him. When he got back to his hotel, he looked out of his window down to the street below, and he saw the three men standing under a lamppost looking up into the room that he was staying in.
Ew, come on.
He confronted them, to which they asked, "You are a friend of Brad Steiger, aren't you?" He replied stupidly that yes, he was, and they told him, "Tell him we will visit him at Christmas time." This never came to fruition, but I hate it.
What in the world? What in the world?
And of these encounters, Steiger said, those responsible for these types of encounters are not the Air Force. This is not military or paramilitary.
It's bizarre, is what it is. Okay, so let's move on to another story. On a clear day in August of 1965, a man named Rex Heflin was on the job as an Orange County highway inspector. There was a tree that was blocking a railroad crossing sign, and he attempted to call in a team to cut it back, but he found that he was unable to do so because his radio airwaves were completely silent. Suddenly, he saw an unidentified object flying across the sky, incredibly close to his position on the ground. But as we've heard many times before, the craft was completely silent, which is inexplicable for anyone that's ever been around anything that flies. It's loud as fuck.
Oh my gosh! So when I lived on Shepherd, it was a training base for pilots, and my God, those were not silent. Oof. It was. Why are you getting all hot and bothered about everything?
Everything. It's literal post PMS. Everything. That scene, that ridiculous sex scene on Top Gun, where all it is seeing their spit floating in the shadows.
I gotta tell you something.
I hadn't seen it till the other week, so.
I love that you already knew I was gonna say I haven't seen it.
I hadn't either. But it's oh my gosh, it was so ridiculous. I was like, I don't know what I think about this movie. I really don't. But right now I'm like, oh, I want to bone every dude on that. I want to bone every dude on that
Even
Air
Tom
Force
Cruise?
team. I'm sorry, everyone, but Tom Cruise, I can't. He's somebody that I don't want to like Tom Cruise, but every movie he's in, I like it.
He's a handsome dude.
Even the Mummy remake, I watched it thinking it can't be as bad as they say, and I was like, I'm entertained. Like, what? I don't know. If only you could just take away the fact that he was a Scientologist. He's been a Scientologist for as long as he's been.
Oh yeah.
Before he was famous.
Yeah.
That's why he probably is.
That's
famous.
why he's famous.
Damn it, though. He's the most charming.
He's a good-looking
and
guy.
You know what? For a while, he looked a little rough, and then I think he got a little work done, and then he started taking care of himself.
Oh yeah.
I just. I don't think I always would, but right now,
let me know in 3 days.
3 days, I'm going to tell you no. But right now, I'm like, okay, fine. Even Val Kilmer in that movie, I'm like, fine.
Val Kilmer was a very handsome dude before.
Fine, Val Kilmer.
Before
the Corona hit.
He was super good looking. And what was it, Tombstone? Oh,
I haven't.
Oh, you're gonna have to watch it. Anyways, moving forward.
I'm not, like right now, I could watch anything, and it could be somewhat pornographic to me.
That's fair.
how I feel at this very moment. So right now I'm like, a bunch of cutter men. I'm like, oh, even
that's your type.
That old mustached man, that's my type.
Oh, Sam, are you talking about Sam? Oh no! Just old mustached man.
Not really, honestly, not really, really, but
oh my. Sure. She's nodding, everybody. She's like, not really, no, shaking her head, but she's like, but really, yes.
Sure. Okay, so let me go back to this man, Rex Heflin. He described the craft that he was seeing that was completely silent, flying above him, as a floating skyscraper. It was about 150 feet in length, and it sailed serenely through the sky. He grabbed his camera and snapped multiple pictures of this UFO. The photos were some of the best ever taken of any UFO, showing complicated machinery on the underside of the craft and a searchlight that shone down on the road. Did we not talk about that slightly with Cody's parents on our Patreon episode?
Yes.
That is on Patreon. The most recent Creeping Up was like a searchlight. Yeah. So, okay. Again, this was 1965, so it might have been a scooch difficult to fake all of this.
For sure.
So Heflin was not all too thrilled by the photos, thinking it was some kind of military vehicle that had yet to be public knowledge. But when he showed his photos to his friends, they did not agree with that nonchalant take on the encounter. One of his friends convinced him that they were bizarre enough that he should send them and the local paper, who published them straight away. He was contacted by a slew of UFO enthusiasts and officials from local military bases who wanted to examine the photos to ascertain if the craft was in fact theirs. Once they investigated into the photos and found the craft was not theirs, they gave them back to Rex and told him to go about his way.
Move along, please.
I'm kind of surprised by that, but...
That's strange. That is strange.
Shortly after, he was visited by a man who said he was from NORAD, North American Air Defense Command, and wanted to examine the photos. The man was, of course, dressed as your typical man in black. Up to that point, any of the divisions of the military that he had given the photos to had returned them back to him straight away, so he had no hesitation in handing them over to this supposed NORAD investigator, right?
No.
But then several weeks passed, and he hadn't heard a thing about when he'd get his photos back, and he called up NORAD to get some answers. He was told by the chief of staff that NORAD did not have the responsibility for evaluation of UFOs, and therefore would not knowingly be in the business of collecting UFO pictures for evaluation.
Damn it.
He realized that the man that had taken his photos had been a god imposter, and there were apparently many different branches of the military that were attempting to find out who this person was, as well as him. Documents released through the Freedom of Information Act revealed that the U.S. government had no idea who these men in black were and were actively working to figure out their identity. An official document dated March 1st, 1967, titled Impersonation of Air Force Officers, written by Lieutenant General Hewitt Willis, gave brief description of Rex Heflin's encounter, as well as describing a subsequent case where a man in dark air... Dark as fuck. When a man in dark as fuck fatigues, no, it's Air Force, where a man in dark Air Force fatigues intimidated citizens and police officers who witnessed a UFO, informing them that they did not see what they thought they saw and they should not talk to anyone about the sighting.
What then? What?
You didn't see what you thought.
Shut up.
The memo ended by imploring any Air Force personnel who encountered anything like this or heard of someone experiencing it to send all the details directly to the Office of Special Investigations, a specialized Air Force intelligence branch.
OSI.
That same year, the University of Colorado began the infamous Condon Report, which we talked about in Project Blue Book, episode 56.
Can we talk about it some more? Project Blue Book? Fuck.
Led by Dr. Edward Condon, which aimed to accumulate the best data about UFO sightings obtained by the copious amounts of encounters members of the Air Force had in the skies. Rex Heflin's encounter with the Men in Black would be one of the reports included in the Condon Report, and was in fact rated as one of the top 4 encounters in the entire report by the coordinator, Robert Lowe. And finally, we've already talked about it, but I'm so happy to announce that Bianca has finally accepted that everything is connected. And here's where I said, we're the Charlie meme with the red string. We both said it. So as Condon was right in the middle of his report, the Men in Black paid Rex Heflin a visit once again. In this visit, they pulled up to his home in a dark black vehicle that he said seemed to have a glow emanating from inside of it. 2 men in Air Force uniforms got out and made their way to his door. He said the minute they were inside his home, there was a strong static charge in the air. Hello, hello. This has happened in so many things, from Skinwalker Ranch,
Black-Eyed Kids, Shadow People.
Even the Hat Man. The radio, which he had on when the men arrived, had started to make bizarre popping sounds he had never heard before. Although the men never blatantly threatened him, Rex said their entire demeanor seemed overtly threatening. Although they only talked to him about recent UFO sightings and oddly asked him about a bunch of people who had gone missing around the Bermuda Triangle, he said they seemed very agitated and were loud and aggressive while they did it.
Why?
They didn't really let him get a word in edgewise, but when he was able to talk to them, he asked for their full names and ranks, which they were totally fine with giving him. But, as I'm sure you can guess, when he followed up with the Air Force on these men, they had no record of them in any capacity, which could or could not be true, as far as what they're saying.
Over the next 2 decades, Gray Barker continued writing books about UFOs and other paranormal phenomena. One of these was 1970's The Silver Bridge, which linked the collapse of the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, with the appearance of an alleged paranormal creature known as Mothman.
The Mothman!
This book preceded John Keel's The Mothman Prophecies by 5 years. And this brings us back to Mr. John Keel. For those of you who don't know the legend of the Mothman, definitely listen to episode 30 of our boys over at Bumblebutt for more in-depth info.
Slightly.
Well, it's Jordan telling the story, so it's kind of in-depth.
We love you. We love you.
But love you, Jordan. But Mothman was a devil-like winged creature with glowing red eyes that haunted Point Pleasant, West Virginia, Mountain Mama, and its surrounding areas between 1966 and 1967, with sightings eventually culminating in, drumroll please, the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant collapsing, claiming 46 lives, and bringing sightings of Mothman to a halt. What does this have to do with Men in Black? We'll tell you right now.
Also, side note, we may one day cover them. The Men in Black, not Men in Black, Mothman, but also JK. That really is one of my favorite Bumblebutt episodes, to be honest with you. So, on December 15th, 1966, a group of teenagers in West Virginia were hanging out at a local hangout called the TNT area.
Nice.
Because it housed a stockpile of explosives from World War II.
Excellent.
Sounds so safe.
Yeah.
Parked in a secluded spot, they were hanging out in a car. So they're either drinking, smoking, fucking, or all of the above, when they suddenly noticed that there was a huge 7-foot-tall figure standing at the back of their vehicle. They said its eyes shone red like fire, and it had large wings that wrapped all the way around its body. Ew. The driver immediately got the fuck out of there, and they drove to the police station to report what they'd seen. While the story was pretty crazy, the local police knew the kids well and felt that they were so terrified about what they'd seen that he could do nothing but believe them. He drove the kids back to the spot where they'd seen the being, but there was no trace of anything any longer. Though, the following morning, the police had reports all over town reporting similar encounters, and the people of the town had dubbed it Mothman. According to John Keel, during the course of his investigation into the Mothman, John Keel claimed to have had an encounter with the Men in Black himself. But before his own encounter, Keel was getting reports of the phenomena from people who had the encounters with Mothman. But this time, answering a question I'm sure many of you have had, it was a goddamn woman in black, so yes, they come in female form too, which we kind of touched on. But this woman would show up at the door of those who had witnessed the Mothman carrying a clipboard like a regular old Susie surveyor. She would claim to be an associate of Keel's and barrage them with questions about UFOs and other paranormal phenomena. Just like with other Men in Black encounters, she seemed to know things she shouldn't about the people that she was paying a visit to, which was extremely unnerving to them as they had never met her before. Several of them wrote Keel, telling him to stop sending this lady around to pester them, but he told them he had no associate like this whatsoever. The people in the community reported black Cadillacs patrolling the streets, occasionally stopping, wherein strange men would get out, posing as federal agents, census takers, or some other bullshit, asking probing, borderline inappropriate questions.
So weird. In early January of 1967, Mary Heyer, who was a correspondent for Messenger, which was an Athens, West Virginia-based newspaper, and was also chronicling Men in Black cases along with Mothman cases, received a visit from a Man in Black. He wore his hair in a bowl style.
Ew.
Yuck. Was less than 5 feet, contradicting reports that Men in Black are tall as fuck, or Air Force, and had weirdly hypnotic eyes and very thick-soled shoes, which I guess is a recurring detail according to Jim Keith's casebook of the Men in Black. The man seemed strangely entranced by her ballpoint pen, and when she told him he was welcome to keep it, his only response was a cackle, and he charged out of the door at high speed into the cold, dark night. I was just thinking, man, go to Staples, my dude. Your mind is going to be blown.
I feel like I have met many of these awkward weirdos in my time. It was February 22nd, 1967, when a high school student named Connie Carpenter was nearly abducted by what she described as one of these Men in Black in the Cadillacs that had been roaming the streets following the Mothman encounters. A man got out and asked her for directions, suddenly lunging at her and attempting to pull her into the car. She managed to break free from the creep and run home, but later that evening, a note was slipped under her door that said, "Be careful, girl, I can get you yet."
Ew.
But you know what's funny about that is...
Nothing?
Be careful, girl, I can get you yet. Now, I know that that's still... that people do talk that way, but... it's kind of like an oddly placed yet, and there was another oddly placed yet in a previous conversation that someone had an encounter with the Men in Black and had told their story. They said yet in a weird way also. So I'm just saying there's two weird yets here. Let's keep that in mind.
Yet is some of their vocabulary.
Keel himself would often mention Men in Black types following him around his home in New York. He says it eventually came to a point where he met with one to, quote, discuss his work, where they told him that if he continued in his research, something bad would happen to him. Back in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the men and women in black were up to even more shenanigans. A young woman who wished to remain anonymous said that she had witnessed a UFO one evening, after which she was visited by a woman in black who told her that she had been selected for further contact. Shortly after, a black Cadillac pulled up and a man in black got out, introducing himself as Apple. He then got back in his car and left.
Okay.
A few days later, that same Apple showed up at her door and asked for a cup of water because he needed to, quote, take some pills. After he took them, he handed the lady 3 of them and told her to take one. Although the woman obviously felt leery of taking some pills a rando dude handed her, she said that she felt compelled to obey.
Okay.
So the minute she'd swallowed the pills, she became super dizzy and got a terrible migraine pounding through the center of her forehead, which is very much the exact same thing that Albert Bender said. As John Keel interviewed her, she told him that the being Apple had been telling her of troubling things that were going to take place in the Middle East, and even that he wanted her to pass along to Keel that something bad was going to happen to Bobby Kennedy in the near future. Which is just... Obviously, the Kennedys have a curse. So yeah, of course. You're just saying something we all know.
Which we've been asked to cover. Perhaps we shall.
But also, obviously, that did happen too.
Yeah.
Keel would later have one of the remaining pills examined in a lab, and it was found to be composed of a sulfur compound, similar to the compounds being used in MK Ultra, which was going on around the same time, which we talked about in episode 34 and 35, because let's say it, everyone... Everything's connected. But was this Man in Black using this to get some sort of truth out of her? Or what exactly was the point of this sulfur pill? Shortly after this encounter, a woman named Jay Perro was kidnapped by these slimy little Men in Black in one of their black Cadillacs.
Kidnapped?
Yeah. Jay said that the dashboard of the car was lit up with flashing lights that seemed to have a hypnotic effect on her. She said that the car interior had the nauseating smell of a hospital and that it got worse as her kidnappers in black held a bottle of sulfuric substance under her nose while they asked her 8 million questions. Then they just dropped her off at the spot they'd abducted her and went about their way.
Ew.
Weird. In October of 1967, a woman named Mrs. B had an encounter with Men in Black that was pretty ridiculous. Mrs. B lived in Lewis Valley, Colorado, and was at her home minding her own damn business when a Man in Black showed up at her door. Mrs. B had recently seen a UFO, you see, and this Man in Black knew all about it. He also looked at Mrs. B's extensive library of books and said to her, I cannot read, but mention any book in any library, and I can tell you its contents.
Oh, jack of all trades.
La-la-dee-da. Fancy, fancy, fancy. He complained about her well-stocked kitchen, telling her that humanity wastes too much time and energy on food, saying it would behoove us to take our nourishment, quote, directly from the atmosphere.
Oh my God, why didn't I think of that? I need to stop being so wasteful.
Yeah. They carried on an awkward conversation a bit longer, and when the man in Black left, Mrs. B wrote down his license plate number, which she took to the police department the next day. And, as you guessed, I'm sure, they could not find a match anywhere. So, why do people even open their doors for these creeps? These are people who would normally be very cautious and wary, but many report feeling compelled, which is just yet another similarity to many different topics that we've discussed before. It's almost like any normal judgment is temporarily suspended. In UFO lore, this is often referred to as the Oz factor, a la Wizard of Oz, in case you didn't catch that. Like reality is bending itself to the will of the UFO and its occupants. They're almost enchanted, like with tales of fairies, where nothing around them is quite as it should be.
One of the most disturbing aspects of the Men in Black is their ability to completely evade identification. As Ashley mentioned before, even the United States Air Force secretly acknowledged in 1967 in that document that men in black were seemingly always one step ahead of those who wanted to follow them.
Damn, and that's the same thing that the researchers at Skinwalker Ranch determined. It's
Always
like
a
it's
step ahead.
omniscient.
There are only 2 known photographs of a man in black, one by a woman named Mary Robertson and one by Alan Greenfield, which I saw both of them, and to me they just kind of look like regular men on the street, so I don't know. It's not to say I don't believe in them. It's just, I don't know if I believe the photos. I mean, we can post them to the Instagram and see what y'all think for sure.
There's also a video, which I think I mentioned in a minute, but
Oh, where they're coming through like
Into
a
a
double
hotel.
door. Yeah. I've seen that one too. In the late 80s and mid to late 90s, there was a wave of men in black activity across the US and Great Britain directly linked with alien abduction phenomena.
let's fast forward to December 1st, 1987, when British police officer Philip Spencer was walking through a rural area known as Ilkley Moor when he saw an alien being off in the distance before him.
Spencer had actually suffered from periods of missing time, the most amazing part of the story of which was a photograph that he had taken displaying a small, dark-colored creature striding up a grassy slope on the moors.
Ew. The creature had green skin, an oversized head, and other obvious alien features. Philip pulled out his camera, took the picture, and the being immediately turned and ran. He chased behind it and made it through an outcropping just in time to see a stereotypical flying saucer take off into the sky at an incredible speed.
Yuck. To determine what had occurred during his periods of missing time, Spencer did a hypnotic regression session and recalls being taken aboard a large silver-colored flying saucer where he underwent some form of physical examination and was given a warning about a future ecological disaster that would affect the Earth.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I just have to say, like, the way that they say this stuff all the time, cannot wait to talk to you about my estimate.
I know.
Okay.
Oh my God, are you... Okay.
Well, if you want to know, you have to listen to our Patreon.
So, Ashley, you and I went on a Hellier binge, and the regression session allowed him to recall the image of the alien entity he encountered. It was about 4 feet, had pointed ears, large eyes, a small mouth, huge hands, and 3 fingers on each hand.
3 fingers. Okay. He contacted local UFO investigators, sharing with them his photos and details of his encounter, and so, like clockwork, the Men in Black were not far behind. The first visit took place January 15th, 1988. As the Men in Black encounters go in the UK, the men claimed to be with the Ministry of Defense, saying they needed to speak to him about his recent encounter and bringing up the photograph he'd taken. They told him to give them the photo negative, though he refused, telling them he had given it to a friend to hold for safekeeping, and his photos were later published, proving that the Men in Black are anything but perfect. And way to go, dude. Because, my God. Okay. In more recent times, a pair of men were captured on hotel surveillance, like I just said, in Niagara Falls, Canada. The 2 men busted into the hotel and began demanding answers to 1,000 questions from the front desk. In addition to their odd, aggressive behavior, the hotel staff noted that the men had slightly weird appearances. They said that the men were the exact same height, had no hair on their bodies, they were very pale, and their faces looked like they could be twins or even clones. After a while, the men began babbling almost incoherently about UFOs and the government, and the staff noticed that the men never even blinked.
So, in more recent events, in 2010, Raven Meindell, a cryptozoologist, writer, radio host, and Wiccan priestess from Michigan, was featured on Monster Quest from the History Channel about werewolves, and stated that when she began to get more serious about her research and writing in 2008, received a Men in Black experience. That's when we'll know that we made it. There will be a Man in Black at our door.
I mean,
not like that, though.
Sexy Man in Black? 'Cause, come on.
You're into it, dude.
Lay it on me.
You're so into it. Raven said of the encounter, on April 16th at about 5:30 p.m., 2 men dressed all in black came out of the apartment across from where I was living at the time. The odd thing about this is that no one was living at that apartment then. They walked away and then got back into a black Lincoln. I mean, I guess they went from General Motors back over to the Ford, but whatever.
I think we talked about this story on Black Eyed Kids.
Did we?
I think we might have, but you just carry on.
Well, when they walked past, I was outside playing with a Frisbee with a neighborhood kid. The Frisbee was called an alien flyer, which I thought was a very odd synchronicity.
Yeah.
Because she was unsettled by them, she tried her best to lighten the situation, trying to crack jokes, but they were stone cold. What an awkward feeling. I hate trying to make a joke with somebody just to, like, lighten the situation, and they're like,
Stone face.
Ugh,
Ugh, the worst.
fuck you.
Yeah.
It was after this weird encounter that she thought to herself that she ought not do any UFO research, and then weird stuff would start to happen after that. The phone would ring and nobody would be on the other line, stuff like that. For months, her family would be plagued with paranormal experiences. She heard whispered voices throughout the apartment. There were strange handprints on the bathroom mirror, and her daughter actually had bruising on her arm with the same look as the fingerprints. And throughout all of that, she totally stopped doing UFO research, but she did finish off saying that she was still fearful of them.
Understandably.
So we talked a little bit about women in black, and I'd like to kind of finish off the history of the men in black with a woman in black. Mm-hmm. We both teased it a little bit throughout the story. Of course, their numbers are less than those of even the men in black. And like we said earlier, Albert Bender's cousin had received a bedroom visitation from a woman in black, although the details are pretty much non-existent.
Even that kind of sounds sexy right now.
What's not non-existent is the case of a man named Colin Purcell. He had an obsession with the final resting place of King Arthur of the mythology, which was believed to be somewhere in an old abbey in Glastonbury. In the later part of 2000, at the height of his research, he received a carefully worded phone call from a woman who said she wished to meet with him to speak about his Arthurian studies. Ashley. To him, this was alarming, as he had no true family to speak of and didn't really discuss his passion for the mythology of King Arthur with anyone else. But he agreed to meet with her. At 7 o'clock on the night he agreed to meet with the woman, he said he opened the door to meet the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life. She was 6 foot tall and about 40 years old, with black hair and milk-colored skin in a chic suit. Actually, as they sat in the living room, she told him, Mr. Perks, I and several of my colleagues have followed your research closely these last few years. This was weird because he didn't publish anything and he didn't talk to anybody about his work. So he told her, if you know anything about me, you'll know that I keep to myself, and that's how I like it. To which she smiled cruelly and said, I do know all about you.
I know that you're in there wanking it at night, you little nerd.
She let him know that his investigations regarding King Arthur's tomb would ensure the opening of a door to a gateway to a harsh realm populated by nightmare creatures that would provoke catastrophe if allowed entry into our world, and causing disaster to the British Isles and possibly the world. So it's not just the USA.
Yeah.
She said, Mr. Perks, you cannot begin to understand the enormity of what stands before you. That is why I am visiting you and not someone else. If you continue and don't let this matter drop, that someone will come calling, and believe me, that you will not want. She told him to stop, to not go snooping anymore, and then left, melting into the dark of the night.
I wonder if she's threatening the Shadow Man or the Hat Man. That's the next step.
Well.
Oh.
Well. He didn't stop. And a few months later, while driving home, he saw that no other cars were on the road, which he found odd, but that there was a man standing in the middle of the road. He slowed and noticed that the man had pale skin, scrawny arms and legs, and a huge pair of leather-like wings.
I thought you were going to say something else.
The head was hairless, with 2 pointed ears and fiery eyes. He floored it toward the creature, but in an instant it vanished. At the end of the week, after everything else was seemingly normal, he was jolted from his sleep by the sight of the creature again.
Ooh.
It grabbed his wrists and said, "You were told that I would come." Telepathically, it told him again to stay away from his research and everything Arthurian, and he did.
Why?
But not for long. He returned to his search in 2008, and in 2009 he had a heart attack and died.
What is he going to get into with the Arthurian stuff? What in the world?
Who knows?
What in the world? So, what are the Men in Black? Like we've talked about earlier in the episode, researcher Gray Barker eventually came to the conclusion that they were simply government agents hell-bent on suppressing the truth of UFOs. Various government agencies claim to know nothing about any of the Men in Black activities, who they are, or what they're doing. It is definitely possible that they're lying, because that is their MO, but their own internal documents released through the FOIA Act do seem to support those claims, though again, that still could be a cover-up. There's also the connection of devils and Men in Black. Many people point out the similarities between the tales of the devil, quote unquote, that go back for centuries, and the encounters with the Men in Black, you know, a man in a dark suit making telling you things, threatening you essentially, making deals with you, ruining your life from that point forward. Folklorist Thomas E. Bullard writes about Men in Black and their place in the bigger picture of folklore and mythology. He says, almost a sense of familiarity attaches to the Men in Black. They step into the shoes of angels and demons to serve as modernized versions of otherworldly messengers, modified to reflect extraterrestrials rather than supernatural employment, but clearly functionaries in the same mold. Even high gods like Odin in Norse mythology sometimes disguised themselves and roamed the earth to dispense justice or stir up strife among humans. And that kind of rings true with other things that we've talked about, even in just like incubus and succubus, where, and like I said earlier, I've said it a couple times in this episode, that it's like tricksters. There's always seems to be some sort of underlying, even in poltergeist and ghost activity, it's like, there's like almost like a trickster element to these things that is across the board with all of them. There's also obviously the possibility that these are aliens or alien agents or spies, which is, kind of how I'm leaning as far as like what I think these things are.
The paranormal aspect to the Men in Black myth is now largely forgotten and limited to pop culture references.
We got Men in Black,
where they are portrayed quite differently from the original reports of the 1950s and 1960s. Primarily,
just bounce with me.
They are portrayed as secretive government agents. Science fiction documentaries such as Men in Black and The Matrix are the most prominent examples that feature characters based more on the concept of Men in Black than the actual Men in Black personas reported, although the Men in Black in the game do have unsettling robotic voices. And that's Deus Ex, not Deus Ex, Ashley.
Oh, I'm sorry. I definitely thought that you were telling me. But we are Men in Black. We are here for your people.
Actual explanations for what the Men in Black encounters actually were or are few and far between, as the phenomenon hasn't received a great deal of skeptical attention, primarily because the reported encounters with Men in Black and Women in Black are so few.
Whatever they are, the Men in Black are a phenomena, like all the others we've discussed, where there are enough first-hand accounts of encounters for me to believe that there is something going on here. As with almost all paranormal topics that we cover, the more we research into them, the more similarities we find between all of them, little characteristics that they share that make me believe more and more that paranormal phenomena seem to originate from a singular origin and aren't just a bunch of separate, terrifying entities, no matter how we interpret them. And so we will continue our quest to find out what everything, the truth of life. What is everything? We're here to find that out. I'm doing it every day. Just trying a little bit more every day, trying to find out the truth of it, this entire world. And it's driving me crazy.
She's crazy. But anyway, so am I, so that's fine.
Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this tale of Men in Black as much as we enjoyed telling it to you.
Absolutely. And researching it was actually so much fun.
It really was.
I could not put the book down.
Oh, yeah. So, again, if you want to join our sweet, sweet cult, creepy ass congregation of Creep It Real, go over to patreon.com/creepitrealpod and you will get sweet artwork from yours truly that I sit there and painstakingly draw each and every one of them. I
signed them, so that's my...
Well, I'm not trying... Sorry, I wasn't trying to make that all about me there.
No.
Yeah, so...
I was joking.
And then we also have special episodes where we talk about all sorts of crazy stuff, like the encounters that Cody from the Bumblefoot podcast has had with the paranormal in his life. And then tomorrow we're recording live a very great episode where we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff that should slightly scare you and also intrigue you about paranormal things.
I'm really excited to sit there with you while you... I'm like dying to hear it. Which will actually be, if this gets out on Saturday, that'll be today.
If this is, I'll be recording. Yes, it is going to come. Yes. Okay. So the day that this episode comes out, we will be recording
live.
Come listen. Yeah. So it's kind of ambiguous. I'm saying I think it's around 7-ish p.m. Central Time that we're going to be recording our live for Patreon. Obviously, if you're not a patron, then you won't hear the actual episode unless you go join our Patreon.
But you watch it. So
have a great life.
Have a great everything.
Creep it real.